Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. Um, I am Dr. Emily Friedman from the Department of English. In most of my life, I'm a late 18th centuryist that studies Jane Austen. But over the last half decade, I've been really excited about the possibilities of games, the narratives that are tied to games, and all kinds of ecosystems around that. And so this is the first public event in an entire semester of celebrating how we can talk about and think about games. And most of those will be here at Pebble Hill. And upcoming, keep an eye on that Talking Games search term. We will have Cameron Kunzelman coming back to talk about his academic work early next month. Meg Baker will be here, a major founder of an entire tradition of games, who will be coming to talk about her work intersecting her work as a sex educator, as a museum professional and textile conserver, along with being kind of one of the most imaginative and influential game designers around. And then we will end the week before Thanksgiving with a special event that will include an in-conversation like this with Quentin Smith, who will then run a game for a very select group of folks. Tickets will be free, but limited in number, so please look out for that. And of course, this is all related to the Common Book tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. The marquee event for that is the conversation with Matt Mercer and myself at the Gouge coming up on September 27th. Tickets are currently available for Auburn University ID holders. And they will be made available to the general public on September 10th. And we expect that once that sale of free tickets goes public, that they will start to go very quickly. So if you are interested, please reserve them now. But that's all what's coming up. But I want to celebrate what's here right now, which is an extraordinary opportunity with two people who I admire a great deal. I've already introduced Cameron Kunzelman, who is a active game journalist of quite a pedigree, who is now coming out to us most immediately from Mercer University, where he is an assistant professor in communications, with a research team involved deeply in game studies and game thinking of all kinds. He is the author of a variety of influential articles and books around different aspects of game studies. He has very kindly agreed to be the interlocutor for our visiting artist here in the college, Jade Dragon. Jade Dragon is the winner of more awards than I would like to count for her many games that are part of a wild and wonderful tradition of boundary pushing in all kinds of ways. Wanderhome is this pastoral that looks light and fluffy until it sinks its teeth into you. Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast takes inspiration from fan fiction and Saturday morning cartoons to give you this deceptively candy-colored pink box that then also allows you to tell stories together about residents, not only with silliness and manic energy, but also in quiet moments, in thoughtful moments about things like aging, things like legacy, things like where home is. And as part of her visit, we have been playtesting her next game, 7-Part Pact, a game about toxic masculinity and super crunchy and takes all day, and it's amazing. So Cameron and Jay are going to have a wide-ranging conversation for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then the floor will be open to you. So this is my recommendation to get those questions handy, and then Cameron will adjudicate that as well. So thank you all for being here and for the gift of your time, and thank you so much for the gift of time. Let's thank in advance our two guests for bringing their thoughts to us. What a pleasure to listen in.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Hello. How are y'all? Yeah, good. Okay, we have to like do that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm here as a facilitator of questions and a provocateur, I believe. Not of content, but of discussion. And so I'm going to try to talk as little as possible. Um, we have prepped some questions.
I like how this feels a little like an interrogation.
We need to turn all the lights off. And
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
We vetted some questions. I'm going to ask you a different question because I thought of one while you were talking, which is how many people in here, there's students in here, correct? Raise your hand if you're a student. How many people are interested in games or game design as a student? You don't have to say you do. Okay, several people are. Can you say a little bit first before we talk about what you do, about how you started making games? I think that's probably important for a general audience to kind of get a sense of where you're coming from.
Absolutely. So I think everyone makes games when they're young. It's part of how we engage with the world in the same way that I think everyone loves to tell stories. It's something we are trained out of, but we find ourselves drawn to. I started making games kind of in any kind of system, like as a process, as opposed to just I think the brilliance of childhood. I was 14 working at a summer camp that in the upstate New York, the Wayfinder Experience. I ran live action role play, which is, for those unfamiliar, a style of play that you get into the woods and want to pretend to be elves in the woods for a day. We came from that to tabletop role playing games. I have never been a video game person. I've always been kind of very in the analog world. I started working on publishing tabletop games following me dropping out of college in 2019. Publishing 2018, 2019. Wanderhome was my breakout success in 2020. Yazebas came after in 2022. That was my origin story, I guess, is going from this very embodied form of play to more kind of like, let's sit at a table and play pretend. Yeah.
And I mean, part of your reputation is as a writer, right? So if people here are thinking about, well, what part of games do I want to interact with, or what part of am I most familiar with, right? You're kind of one-stop shop for a lot of this stuff, right? You write in terms of like fiction and text and things like that, but you're also a rules writer, and you're kind of known as someone who plays with all of that. Of course, we've heard about the 3 games, and the most recent game you're working on is, as you said, much more crunchy than maybe some of the stuff you've done before. You think those things are connected to one another, that kind of free-form play into? Yeah.
Well, I think that happens is a lot of people who are interested in game design don't necessarily identify what it is they're doing when they call themselves a game designer. I think that if I was to run a game for all of you, I would be designing a game. But if I then go off and I write a book that explains to people how to run a game for a group of people, right? If I run a game here and then I go and I write that down and give it out to other people, I have not I've done a different thing in writing that book than I would have if I was sitting here running a game for you, right? That it's the difference between going to a party and writing a poem about having gone to a party, right? There's a level of distance in what it is to be a game designer that game designers oftentimes get a little uncomfortable. Game designers like to think of themselves as making the experience, but I'm making an object that you use to make an experience, right? I am not the director of a play. I'm a script writer, right? I'm making a thing and you're gonna take it and run off with it. So to that end, a lot of my work is I give you a book, and the act of you playing the game is that you're gonna sit with my book, you're going to figure out from it how to run this game, and then you're gonna run this game with your friends. And a lot of what I'm concerned with is that I want to make sure that you sitting with my book is an enjoyable experience, right? I want to make sure that if you just sit with the book, if you don't run the game, you have a nice time. But I also want to make sure that the act of sitting with the book, that interpretive translation act is like compelling and like fruitful, and it's not just me coming down from the heavens reciting to you precisely what you must do to achieve fun, but instead that you are going to engage with the thing I wrote. You're going to agree with some of the things I wrote and disagree with some other things and forget or misinterpret some other stuff I wrote, right? There's an active process of you misunderstanding and recontextualizing and arguing with me. And then you're going to play a game with your friends, and they're also going to do that too, maybe, right? Especially as they play more, that you're going to start doing your own thing. And my actual artistic process is the making of the book. It has nothing to do with it ultimately at the long end of it has nothing to do with what you do over there. So I consider myself a game designer, but I think that it means that I'm very concerned with like, is this an enjoyable thing to read, right? Is this going to be nice to sit with? And also, can I complicate what you're going to do? Can I create ambiguity that's useful? Can I have something that you read one way and then at the end of the game you come back to and you read a different way? And you're like, oh, wait, the game actually never said that I had to try to win, right? The game never said that I had to play it in this way or that way, right? Can I make a sentence that can be read multiple different ways, and every different way you can read it is actually fruitful? There's not a correct way. There's not a canon that you have to come back to. Those are some of my big concerns that I think what makes me love game design, but also what makes it kind of, stand out writing. It's stand out in those ways, different from what other people are trying to do.
I mean, a lot of what you just said are things I've heard poets say, right? And it feels pretty distinct, actually, from, say, the way someone might write a novel, write fiction, right? Can you just talk a little bit about that process of how do you pick the objects that you work with, right? So we got the rundown of Wanderhome and Yoseba's Bed and Breakfast. They have these touchstones, a particular kind of stuff, right? But how do you find a way into that, the kind of images you want to use or the kind of language you want to use?
So can start with a particular tactile or conceptual sensation. When I was younger and doing LARP, this was very immediately physical experiences like, oh, can I make you feel like a medieval alchemist, right? What do I have to do to you? What do I have to put in front of you that if you do engage with it the way I think you'd have fun doing, you'll maybe feel like a medieval alchemist, right? Can I do that to you?
You gotta do it to me, all right? Come on.
Yeah,
you feel like an alchemist. Come on.
I gave a bunch of kids copper sulfate, and one of them accidentally actually made sulfuric acid.
That's not good.
In the middle of the LARP. It's fine. Don't worry about that. Statute of limitations. So like that was like very immediate tactile things, right? Okay, here's the thing here's a very physical thing. If I put you in a situation, can you get that very physical thing? And then as I kept going, I got really concerned with the more poetic abstract, like with Yoseba's Bed and Breakfast, the big concern was, can I make a game that feels like being in community with people over the course of many decades, which is on the surface, right, you can say that sentence, and that's a really easy sentence to say. But then as you dig into it more and more, you're like, oh, this is actually a really complicated, like, there's a lot of different parts to what it means to be in community with people for many decades. There's a lot of things happening, right? How do I incorporate all of those things into a tactile thing? So like Yoseba's Bed and Breakfast, the game styles itself as the house, right? Yoseba's Bed and Breakfast is the name of the house that the game is in. The front cover is the house. The opening of the book is the sign on the front door. The book has cubby holes and hiding spots and secrets and ballrooms and closets. It's structurally the house.
And it's a big book too. If people haven't seen it, I mean, you look at it laid on a table, and it's substantial.
It's a Fat Girl Games. It's a game that is physically large, even if to get you to play it would not take that much of it. The fact that the book is so big, there's very few things that I know will be on the table when you play. One of them is the book, which means that the book can have properties to it. Like, I'm a designer of the book. As much as, I don't have that much control of what you're doing at the table, but I can at least design the book that's sitting at the table. And so I can make the book convey things, provide things. The art can be compelling because you flip to the random page and it inspires you. The book can have interstitial text or stories that don't directly tie into the game, but are just kind of stories throughout, because that can inspire you or evoke imagination. Yeah, so that whole thing, I think, is the object is the whole object is working together.
I mean, thinking too about other kind of forms of creation, right? Part of the work of being a creator, part of the work of being a critic, right, is making these judgment calls about what's good and what's bad, right? And so you're describing the process in which you're designing a physical object from top to bottom, from nothing into something, right? Into full, complete, it's on the table at someone's home. And that's experience design all the way through. And so for you, how do you know when you've hit the mark, right? I think a poet knows in their heart when they've hit the mark. But not every poet has to go out on the marketplace and, make sure that they sell a large book to people. So I wonder, where in your gut do you feel like you've made the right choice when it comes to those decisions?
I think sometimes you can't, right? I think if there was an easy metric, it would be easy. It would be easy, right? All artists would everywhere breathe a sigh of relief. But I think that I just have to make a thing that like there's a certain point in, and like that's playtesting, that's beta reading, where I start noticing when I start to notice that there's a thing I think about, which is different kinds of engagement with the same object, right? Where if I give you a rule, if I've got a game and I've got a rule in the game that says no flying, um, some people are going to, while playing that game, be like, got it, right? No flying, on it. I'm going to avoid flying at all costs. Some people are going to go, well, that's like a weird rule, right? What is it? What happens when I try to get close to flying, right? Like what happens if I like get up on a really tall building and I look down? What happens? Some people are going to like ignore that rule, right? And then some people are also going to maybe do other things that I don't anticipate when I write that rule, right? There's going to be like, I think I can anticipate maybe the 3 most popular reactions. I will see when playtesting the 6 most popular reactions, and I know that there's going to be like at least 11 different things that people at various points tell me about over the lifespan of the object. So I'm making a game that's not I'm not like I'm going to write this rule and it's going to make people feel happy, or I'm going to write this rule and it means people won't fly. It means that I'm writing a rule and I'm saying I think it's interesting when people do things in response to being told don't fly, right? Like if you've ever trespassed past a no trespassing sign, or if you've ever walked past a no trespassing sign, that sign changes your experience of moving through that space, even if you ignore it, right? It's still there. And so I think for me, I know that the game is kind of in a state where I'm happy with it when I'm seeing people respond to things in the range of ways that I think are interesting, and I'm not seeing. I think like when I've like sometimes you'll put something there and you'll realize the most common reaction is really uninteresting, or that like if I put up a big sign that says no flying, and then but I want the game to be about flying, and then most people don't fly, then I've just blundered. Right, that was just a mistake, and so I get a feel for once people are kind of in the range of interesting experiences, and it's enough that when I run a playtest, I kind of know how it's going to go every time, and then I can kind of start taking more and more steps back because it's getting nailed down.
Yeah, it's almost like, finding the statue in the block of marble in some ways that you're describing, right? It's taking like a huge semantic space, right? In some ways, the block of marble is a little bit easier because it's at least defined in space and time, right? The game isn't. You can work on it the rest of your life.
Well, the difference between video games and analog games, digital games and analog games, is that in a digital game, right, you start with a black screen, and then there's Mario on the screen, and then you can, the game designer has set up a way for you to make Mario jump, and you can, and then there's things you can do with Mario, but you start from nothing, and then the everything that's possible is being kind of built up to you. And then in analog games, you sit down at a table, you can imagine anything, right? You can say any combination of words in any order. And then the game says this is a fantasy game. And that immediately cuts out a swath of the words that you could say. And the game says you are a goblin. And that cuts out another huge swath of the words you can say. And then the game kind of chisels down and down the things that you are going to say until like the things that the game says you're supposed to say. And so I think there's like an additive versus subtractive thing happening there. Yeah.
Is that liberating for you, or is that constricting?
There's a relief to game design that I think that what's the right way to put it? I think that it is really interesting to me for people to explore uncomfortable conditions. And I think that knowledge that I can make something that is really kind of uncomfortable and people will still engage and have like type 2 fun, right? They'll might be stressed in the moment but have fun afterwards, but maybe they'll just be stressed. But like I think that there's a knowledge of like people are going to do what they will. I am trying to stop them, and I will not be able to stop them. And that is a huge load off my shoulders because it means that I don't have to stop them, right? If I fail to stop them, it's fine. But also that I'm not trying to set them up. I'm not trying to give them permission. They already have all the permission they need. I'm trying to stop them. But I know that I'm not going to succeed at stopping them. I feel like maybe it's a little bit like I think sometimes like I'll hear parents or educators talk about like, you've kind of got to like parents will set rules with their kids and they know that the kids are going to break those rules a little bit, but you've got to kind of set up those things to let them be toppled, right? You've got to have that like the rebellion moment will happen and that's okay,
Yeah, it's fun to, when you see a sign that says "Don't walk on the grass," it's fun to walk on the grass.
The grass.
We all want to walk on the grass. Oh, I got it. I'm going to narrate picking this up. All right, I got it.
Thank goodness, yeah.
Very good.
Folks at home.
We'll take a water pause. There we go. You keep going back to childhood. You keep talking about kids. Tell me about that.
That child is a made up thing, right? That the idea of childhood is an invented second thing that isn't. Kids are people who just don't have context for anything, and who also exist in a massively marginalized position in our society. Probably one of the worst things you can do to an adult is to inform them they now have the legal rights of a child. Sorry, I guess your parents get to send you to a prison for the next 20 years. Bye. So child is a made up thing, but I think that it is also kind of a little bit of like it kind of occupies a space of like wildness. Like there's a because children are treated as this kind of other space, they get to do things that grown-ups don't get to do. And so I, as a designer, trying to kind of play with grown-ups, trying to kind of invite them to play with me, I think a useful way to get them back there is to say, hey, let's play the way we did when we were kids, right? To invoke the childhood, say, come with me and like remember being a child, right? I think a lot of my games, people look at my games like, oh, these are games for children. And I think kids do enjoy my games. Awesome, good.
And they do have bright colors. They have very evocative imagery for children. Yeah.
For their game, they're very popular, I think, among grown-ups who want to feel like children, right? Who want to have a kind of a middle space to come back to. And I think that is, it's like children, when they play games, children are monsters. I was talking about this in Emily's class earlier, but like children love hyperviolence. Children love strange themes. They love the psychosexual. They love the bizarre. That's, I'm not making my games for that, but I'm trying to kind of get people to be like, hey, what if we can play with the contextlessness that we were able to bring when we were kids? Can you come to that space with me? Can you play in that space with me? Trying to kind of walk the line of like inviting to think about your past, to think about your youth without, I think, falling for the demon that is nostalgia.
Okay, well, you've set up your own question here, right? I mean, I guess I want to say, children love it when Daffy Duck's head, like Bill, goes on the back of his head. I think that's like everyone's choice. Is that resonant for the youth in the room when Daffy Duck's head goes around? Okay, great. No, good to find out. Good to find out that the references of Daffy Duck don't play the way they used to. But I do wonder about that. I mean, continue on that line of thought, right?
Sure. I think people love to invent, love to like take solace in the idea of like, oh, when I was a kid, things were pure and things were good. I think there was a moment that was going around the internet recently, has been going on for a couple of years now, where someone was posting all these like nostalgic, like, oh, back in the day when meals were home cooked and, there was no devices in sight in 1998. Oh, like, and it's like, okay, well, we have a lot of like you can kind of get away with that for the 1800s because no one's like there's not like a preponderance of video evidence, but the more nostalgia tries to like do the things it's always done to stuff that I think is getting like collapsed further and further into the present moment, it just feels more and more absurd. So I think that I feel very aware, at least, of like, if I tell people like, oh, this is the game that's going to bring you back to your better days, right? A kid, you were happy and things were simple and nothing was complicated. This game is that. That feels really evil, maybe, because that feels like I'm presenting you with a really kind of like inviting you to do a thing that is ultimately, I think, rather regressive, because I think that the way childhood gets constructed means that there's not necessarily space for people like me, right? Like a lot of my friends, right? I think that childhood kind of is built on a lot of norms that kind of really suck, right? Childhood is a space of tremendous social inequality, and also of keeping people out, of walled gardens. And so I want to say like, hey, take some of these elements, bring them back, but let's recontextualize them, let's repurpose them, let's build something let's build towards something new rather than trying to take solace in what has come before us.
Yeah, and you've talked a lot already. I mean, not using this language, this is a slight rephrase, but you've talked a lot already about almost like a positive friction, right?
Yes.
If you take those things and kind of rub them together, these various different elements from memory, from expectation, from social expectation. Maybe it wasn't actually yours, but it was in the zeitgeist. That you can kind of rub them together like two sticks and make a fire out of it.
Absolutely, yeah. That I think people love to talk about, oh, I want a game that I can turn my brain off and I can just be in the flow state of. I have a lot of issues that we were talking about that even earlier, the issues with that that kind of turning the brain off. I think we live in a time period where there's a lot of people who can financially and materially benefit from you getting really good at turning your brain off, right? That's kind of, I think the culture we exist in is one where you are encouraged at every angle and every opportunity to stop thinking about things and to let it passively move through you. And I am really interested in a game that says, well, actually, let's put some hiccups in that. Let's create some friction. Let's create some stuff that just doesn't quite fit, so you can't just turn your brain off. You have to stop and recalibrate and adjust, and then you start thinking about, well, what do I need, right? What do the other people need? What does this thing we're trying to do need, right? You start thinking about, like, what does it mean, right? Should I take these words at face value? Should I what should I be thinking about? And then that allows you to start, I think, like that friction produces really interesting, deeper play. Even if it doesn't let you turn your brain off, it lets you find new zones of doing interesting things together.
And to think about that in context or with some examples for people, right? So you saying that immediately makes me think about if you read a Dungeons and Dragons manual, right, or a splat book or something that tells you how to play that game, right? There's nothing in those books that says, "Hey, listen, we're giving you a bad idea. And you need to think about that, right? There's often moral dilemmas, right? But they're moral dilemmas that have often more than one good outcome, right? And it rewards you for being clever and thinking your way around a solution. And I think the distinction you're making, and for people here, to kind of latch onto that, which I think is important, is that you can present players with a deadlock and then ask them to sit with the deadlock, rather than to think around it or to resolve it neatly, right?
There's a game called Wish Your Theurgist Fatalist by Jenna Moran. One of the first games I read when I was young, the reason why I'm the way I am. It's a very strange game in a lot of ways. One element of it that I want to bring up is that it's a game where you're on this quest to tear apart the old world and build something new. It's a game where as you play, you end up kind of inventing and rewriting rules. The quest is divided into many stages. Every single stage is marked as saying, you cannot succeed, you cannot get past, you will fail. Right? That's a rule of the game. At each step is, and if you get here, you will not succeed, you will fail. And so it's like, well, the rules of the game say that I cannot go forward. And yet there is another thing after this. So what on earth do we do, right? How do we reconcile this? How do we get around this? And you can't get around it cleanly. You can't get around it neatly. You have to figure it out, and then you can move forward. And that, I think, is really, that's just very like, there's a game that we were talking about earlier. Also, Triangle Agency came out recently that's a game that's a parody of like corporate, like working within a corporation. It's a parody of a lot of investigative procedure games, like a lot of like Monster Hunter style games.
It's written like a corporate training manual, for example, right? That was the form of some of that.
And in this, on the front page, there's a thing that says, here are the 3 rules of the book. Read every page in order. Do not read any pages that lack numbers. Do not interpret any text in this book. Don't interpret any of it, which is just so on its face ballsy, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just to read this 300-page book and not interpret. It's so, which I adore, because it sets you up to say, well, I don't know if it's telling the truth right now. And then you start wondering, like, well, what else is the game not telling the truth? And then it gets really fruitful.
Yeah, I would encourage people, if you're into any of these kind of analog games, it's really worth looking at Triangle Agency for a few different reasons. And one of them is the way it sets itself out. And also, there are parts of the book that if you follow the rules of the book, no one will ever see. The book tells you not to look at them. It tells you not to look at the pages. And so it invites you, right, to be critical of it, to kind of question what the rules themselves are. And it produces, I think, a very different kind of experience.
Because you could play it and just take it as is and just be like, I'm here to play the game. I'm going to follow the rules. You get an experience, which is like fine. You get the kind of, there's a lot of other games. Delta Green does that. There's just a lot of games that do that kind of thing. And you just do it and you're like, okay. But then you're like, well, what if I like break the rules of the game? Like, what if I reject some of the claims the game is making about how the game works? What if I argue with the game or I mediate with it to try and find a new game that's not quite what it was telling me to do, but also not quite what I was going to do originally? And then you get some really interesting, weird places where you start kind of pushing outside of what seemed like the walls of the game. You realize, oh, there's actually a second, weirder, wilder thing hiding outside of this one.
Yeah, have people here, oof, that's hard. Have people here played the game Control, the video game? Okay, we have one person. Congratulations. Big up to you. It's in conversation with that as well. Right? It's a game that's also asking you to do that. I mean, something we've touched on a couple times here is using games to critique games or using games to critique kind of games culture. And I'm really curious about what you think about that, right? You're someone who's known for spoken about your ideas about design. I think there's a reason you're in this room. There's a reason why you're doing this thing, is you're willing to talk about those things. And so I wonder, how do you distinguish those things? You do some kind of text-based critique where you write about other games, what you think is good about games, what you think is bad. And then you're making the games that do that stuff. And how do you balance that? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that it's like constantly learning how to talk about art in the context of the world we live in, right? It's always the thing people are banging their heads on the walls about all the time in so many disciplines. I think that in a lot of ways, like the way that people end up getting into game design is most often because there's a thing I wrote about very early on that I called the puzzle maker's paradox, which is the idea that you've got an object that is completely inaccessible, a goddamn enigma, and 90% of the people who engage with it are going to go, well, this is confusing and miserable, and I don't want to touch it. I'm going to go walk away. 10% of the people who engage with it get completely fixated on it because you've got an enigma that cannot be solved, and you want to solve it, and so you try to, and you do, and then the in game design, right, the thing you end up solving becomes like your proposed solution becomes a second game, and it means that I think frequently game designers are motivated by disappointment, that there's someone who encounters something that they want to be doing the thing they want it to do, and then it doesn't quite, and so they make a thing in response to it, and then someone else comes along and is disappointed and makes a new thing. And so a lot of, I think, game designers are people who have that kind of impulse of you encounter, you want to make a thing that's better than like you see a thing, you see the potential in it, you want to make a new thing that's about that. I think that is like, that's kind of the main engine that makes games happen. But also I think it's important to be able to talk about like what are games doing as art objects, where games fail. I think I am often limited by existing in the RPG industry as well as the RPG art practice. And so there's a lot of things I can't just prattle on about, right? I'll read a game and I'm like, this is a bad game. And then I go, I don't think anyone needs to know this is a bad game. I will keep my mouth shut because this person is a lovely person and the work they're doing is important. And if I say something negative about it, I am the hammer of God smiting them. But I think that like still it is necessary, right, to find ways to talk about what games do and also how games let you down, right? Where do games succeed at, how does a game kind of, the object do the things it's trying to do? How does it fall short? And also like, if you wanted to do something and then it doesn't do that, what's the next step, right? What do you do about that, right? So I think there's a lot in there with games, but I think that we're still learning how to even talk about like, what does it mean for a game to, as an art object, succeed or fail at the goal it's trying to have? Because so often the quagmire of games opinions is that if you just read the game and you don't play it, how on earth can you have an opinion about it? Because all you did was read the game. You didn't even play it. And if you play the game, well, that's just your experience of playing the game, right? Like that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the game. So there's like, at every step, the game kind of gets to dodge any kind of judgment, because there's no way to really, be to sum it, which is a convenient for us game designers, but also I think miserable for trying to say, well, this game has goals, right? This text has goals, and it has achieved or it has failed at those goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting again, not to drag this back to other art forms, but that's quite different from poetry or from a novel or from a film, right? In the sense that because the game always lives somewhere else from where the discourse is, right? It gets to kind of be mobile in a lot of different ways that maybe other art forms are not.
And I think frequently that's why so much of the best critiques of games are games responding to games,
right.
Because that you get to be constructive with it instead of saying like, oh, I think this game is bad. I think I can do better. And then you see what the doing better is, and you get to see in the difference what has been produced. I also think that oftentimes you'll have, oh, I had a thought, it was a good one. I think that you'll have a lot of like sometimes you'll find really interesting critiques emerge from playstorming, which is for those who don't know, the practice combination of brainstorming and playtesting, which is where we sit down with a game and we approach it with a very kind of emancipatory, explosive brainstorming mindset. And it's like, oh, this isn't working, get rid of it, add this in, cut this out, change this around, right? It's very kind of free form. And I think you also start to see kind of like, I think that there's potential in there for like how do we critique games, is we can also say like, well, what does it mean to, while you're in the game, blow up the game, right? And this also comes to me from I love arguing, I love having opinions, shocker. I love when I can, and I love when a game kind of sets me up to have opinions, and a game that is good enough to really be warranted, like to after you play it to really be thinking about it. And so one of the best critiques of Bluebeard's Bride, for instance, that I ever engaged in was one that a friend of mine ran where she hacked Bluebeard's Bride, which, for those who don't know, is a game of feminist horror. She was frustrated by the way in which it was very cis and white in how it thought about feminist horror. One of the moves being like call for help, right? Which is just a thing that is something that's really comfortable to reach for when you are a cis white woman, but is not something that really fits into the what does it mean to be a trans woman who is experiencing feminist horror. And so she ran it with a group of trans women. Incredibly transformative play experience, incredibly profound critique of Bluebeard's Bride, but also it was a private interaction, not something to be shared broadly. So I think we're still learning how to even critique, how to even like get at analog games that way.
I mean, what's really interesting too is when we think about critique, we often think about published critique, right? Mm-hmm. We think about a critique that endures in some kind of way, whereas play itself as a form of critique is necessarily ephemeral. Mm-hmm. I mean, it can be captured, actual plays, all those different things, right? But that is just in terms of like the production of critique. That's the same as writing an essay, right? It's perhaps more robust, if only because it has lots more perspectives. But it necessarily goes away.
This was a concern for me, I think, when I was first starting out in tabletop games. This was like the last vestiges of LARP clinging to me, was thinking about negativism and like that kind of work, and the idea of like, can I make an ephemeral object? Can I make it intentionally? Can I make a game that I released one game, you can't tell people what it's like to play it. You can't, you just give them the game if they want to know, but you can't talk about what it was like to play. And that kind of like, how can I make an object that knows that it's just this private moment between us that's not trying to be in the bigger cultural conversation, is an interesting challenge of games. Games often, some of the best games, I think, are like some of the most interesting game communities frequently resist outsiders, and I think sometimes in really awful and frustrating ways. I think, but as we talked about also off of this, but I think also I understand the impulse, because play can feel so magical in its ephemerality, and I understand why people want to get really protective of like, oh, if I let people understand what we did here, it would somehow, I have to keep it scarce.
I mean, I want to go down that rabbit hole. I don't have a watch on me. When did we begin? Oh my word. What a great time. Let's go one last question, then we'll kick it over to questions. How about that? Is that okay? Because we talked about a couple different things before we were up here. Eric Zimmerman.
Yeah.
So Eric Zimmerman is a game designer at NYU. Was at NYU or is still at NYU. Wrote a very famous manifesto, I don't know, 10 years ago. That said the 21st century was going to be the ludic century. It would be defined by games. And I think he meant digital games for the most part. Maybe that's happening, maybe that isn't. But if so, it's really clear, especially post 2020, that analog games are going to be a part of that. Do you think that games have a social obligation going forward? Do you think that analog games have some sort of obligation to speak to the world in a direct way? I want to think about a big ethical question before we kick it over to the audience.
I think that it's tricky because I think we have a social obligation, right? I have to be a responsibility as a person with a platform. Yeah, there's a good angle at it. Talks about why game designers exist, because as we established at the start of this, right, that kids will just make games. Kids will just play. They don't like for 3 people alone for an indefinite period of time. You come back, they will have found ways to have fun. It's just what we want to do. So like, what the hell is the game designer doing? Why am I getting to come in and say, like, why am I selling the fun back to you? Is a critique I see of game design. And my response to that is that, well, there's something in analog games. There's if I want to play tag, but I want to play rough tag. I want to play tag where I'm really getting active with it. I might go to an older kid and be like, "Hey, older kid, what's the way to do that? Like, tell me the way you play tag. I want to play tag like that because I want to go rough with it." They'll teach you the rules. You'll play in that style, and you'll be like, "Oh, I got this particular thing I was chasing after. I could have figured out on my own. I could have done that work. It would have been harder. It would have been longer. I didn't want to. And there's someone I trusted to know how to do it, so I went to them for it." And then you get older and you're like, okay, well, tag's all fun and good. I want something really, really, I want something that's going to elicit a really, really complicated emotion, like maybe like several complicated emotions. But I want something really in particular that I'm not going to be able to just, make up on my own. It's going to be dangerous and exhausting to make up on my own. And so you go to some trust to get the method by which you can approach that, right? And so my role as a game designer is that I'm someone that people trust to be able to help them find ways to have fun. And that does have a social obligation because it's a position of trust. It's a position of they are people who want to get things. They want to learn how to approach the world from me, and that means that I could lead them astray. I could use that trust unfairly and maladaptively. Maybe the best way to have fun is to Venmo me $20. Nobody ever considered that before, right? And if I put out a zine that said, the best way to have fun is to Venmo me $20, people would do it. I think that would be really bad. I know there's a non-zero. It would be really bad of me. And so that is a bit of a social responsibility. I don't think that like games as objects have any more or less than anything else, but I do think that we live in an age of gamification. We live in an age where like the ludic century is not an optimistic claim in a lot of ways, right? Like I remember like getting a retail job at Staples and then making me spend 2 days in a back room playing this like really miserable game that was supposed to teach me how to work at Staples. And just the most depressing game object I've ever engaged with, including games trying to depress me.
I mean, I don't want to make a plug for my own book, but I wrote about in the science fiction games book that I wrote about the KFC's VR Learn as a Chicken Fryer game.
It's disgusting. It's exhausting. And I think also about slot machines, which Cascade says but actually that is much beneficial. That is, slot machines are the way a friend of mine described it is that slot machines are like a greased spike pit surrounded by like a greased pit with a bunch of spikes at the bottom, surrounded by all these ads for how much fun it is to slide around in the grease. And then when someone goes over and slides around in the grease and falls in the spikes and dies, we're all like, oh damn, that addict. They were just addicted to the grease. Damn, what was to be done, right? It's like, no, you've made a death trap for them, like through game design, right? You've made this thing that catches people and slowly drains them of everything you've got. I think that like games provide a method of we have learned the tools as game designers to produce obsession, right? There's biochemical inputs you can give the human brain that causes the brain to just shut off and fixate. And I do think that as a game designer, you have an obligation to know both that that dark magic exists and that you must be mindful in your wielding of it. I think that is just for me the same kind of moral obligation I hold anyone to, right? I think that we have a certain amount of, it's important for us to be good to each other. It's important for us to make the kind of things we want to see in the world. I don't think games have a supernatural or hypnotic power. I don't think games truly can mind control someone into doing something. I cannot make a game that forces your hand. But I want to make the games. I want to make the games that if people engage with in good faith because they trust me, it will make the world more like what I want to see, right? And if people trust me, if people are giving me that grace, I want to lead them in a direction that I think is morally worth leading them in.
Great. No, I'm kidding. The end. No, it's not the end. Now time for questions. I'll walk around the microphone. Someone has a microphone.
Sitting out in front of you.
There we go.
This is Yuseba's bed and breakfast.
That's big.
It's big. She's my chubby girl.
You should check it out on your way out the door.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I didn't know we had copies. Otherwise, I would have held them up. We got them. Oh, got you. Got it.
Yes.
Concerns, worries. Yeah, absolutely. I went immediately into teacher mode. Sorry.
Yes.
Hello. Okay. Hello, my name is Rin. I was curious about what programs you use to design and create your games.
So ever since I was a kid, I have used my dear friend and neighbor Google Docs. Google is my friend, and it's Google Suite on my buddies. Actually, genuinely, my playtesting method is I get with my friends on the Discord call. If I'm writing anything, I've put it in Google Docs because I want them to be able to comment on it and edit it as we go. If we're moving any boards around, I generally make those boards in Google Slides because it's just a PowerPoint presentation, just a bunch of flat surfaces that people can put little objects. You kind of move them around. It's actually really good for that. And then I use Google Sheets for if I've got a lot of math that has to get done. So that's randomness is Google Sheets can do that. So I try to keep it as simple as analog as possible for online playtesting. And in person, I print things out. I use whatever I've got lying around. I buy little gewgaws off the internet, and I just kind of have them. But I think that it's with playtesting, the most important thing to figure out is kind of the raw reaction, or it's just kind of get in the space and play. There's a process I even do where sometimes if I have an idea Wednesday morning, I will have spent Wednesday writing it up, and then by noon on Thursday, I'll have organized a group of people to play with me. Thursday night, right? I try to play with people as soon as possible, even if the system is a pile of junk, even if the stuff I've got for it is useless and frustrating and garbage, because I just want to see how people play and how people respond to it. And it is always okay, especially when playtesting, to just tell your friends hey, I have not written the rules for combat yet. Just if we get into a combat, we'll just flip a coin, okay? Right? Okay, there's going to be incentives. So you're going to get XP if you do these things. I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know what you use that for. Just know that you get that and that you want it, right? You can just tell people to hand wave big chunks of it when playtesting. Or hey, there's going to be a board that measures this. There's not right now. Let's just pretend, right? People are so good about that. The important quality is just getting in the zone with them and seeing what they do. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, when the thing you're designing is experience, you need to have experiences in front of you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially when it's I'm just trying to start to think about people's reactions, right? If I fixate too much on getting it perfect before I show anyone, they might react in a way that I totally don't expect, and then I have to start all over, and that's just other things to do. Yeah.
Hey, so I think a fairly common experience when people play games is either themselves or they recognize in their friends behaviors that they might not have expected. You can take the most fair-minded person in the world, and when they play Monopoly, they're going to become a brutal capitalist, or the most honest person playing Secret Hitler is going to become paranoid and a liar instantly. And I think it's easy to become very cynical about that, but there's also, I think, obviously a lot of potential to things to be learned from that, whether it be like socio-political of realizing like the systems we set up and how that boxes people in, or like from like a psychological point of view of recognizing your own shadow or whatever. But as a game designer, how do you decide when to kind of reflect that back on to like give that person that recognition of, oh, maybe I'm playing this in a way that doesn't make me feel very good, or how much, or when do you like let it be more free and just maybe they'll recognize that at some point, but you didn't like put a mirror in front of them?
It's a wonderful question. That is often, I think, a thing that comes up. It's actually even, I've been working on developmental editing for the 7-part pact. That has come up. That exact question has been an ongoing point of conversation with me and the editor. The way I've been thinking about it is in terms of the friction we talked about earlier, which is that I think giving people the tools to, I think, there's a concept in a lot of embodied play called bleed, which is the moment when your character actions and your when they start to like feed in and out of each other, right? When you're being a capitalist in Monopoly, and then that makes you start feeling capitalistic, and you realize after the game you're like, oh, I'm engaging in that mode still. And bleed can be productive, it can be frustrating, it can be all sorts of things. I think that the way to create that self-reflection is to, at least the tool that I like to come back to, is that I can kind of create periods of bleed, and then I can alienate you from it. I can kind of have you, I can pause and I can pull you apart as being separate from your character again, and I can say like, oh, how do we feel about all this, right? There's a tool, one of the tools that I encourage in 7-Part Pact is that it's a game where you are playing as a wizard, you're playing as a GM, everyone plays as a GM of kind of their segment of the world, and then you are a player at the table. And there's passionate feelings, or when someone does something really shitty, you got to stop and you got to address which of these things you're talking about, right? Like in the playtest I ran on Monday, Ireland, 100,000 people. It was like, I felt that was a terrible idea. So did a bad thing, right? It was like, there's a moment of like, okay, this is not, right? Like, this is the thing the game got you to do. It wasn't you, it was the thing you're a part of. And I'm just making sure that like people can kind of engage on those levels and teaching them to kind of like feel okay separating them, and to know that like the cool thing about a game, I think it's actually really special about a game, is that you can engage in really kind of antisocial and unpleasant ways and allow that to still be itself social, right? That I can be a right bastard to you, but we're both afterwards having fun and laughing about it. And that's great, because you don't necessarily get to do that other times. And so, but making sure that it's understood, right? That there's, being a right bastard to you is not a thing that it's like that it's happening within the game. They kind of that move, that alienation, that friction. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more right here.
Hello. I'm used to having a microphone in front.
Yes.
I have 10 students of mine in this, and I have 40 of them. No, sorry, 60 of them. They don't come to these events, but they are tasked with generating in teams a game, a tabletop game, card game, whatever, related to the readings that we have been doing in the first part of the semester. Do you have some form of advice for them? That would be my question, because they don't have the opportunity to meet people like you.
Totally, absolutely. I think the thing I was coming to, this is a thing from Holland that I think, which is the idea that something that games are oftentimes doing, if they're really good at doing, is that they're a metaphor for another thing. That they're a way of saying that, hey, this abstract or social or structural thing is similar to this physical action we're doing in this moment. So I could say love is like a Jenga tower. I could say love is like a trick-taking card game. I could say love is like a game of chess, right? I can take a big thing out here and I can bring it down to a thing we're doing right here. And this will be exact because that's like the point, right? That's the friction, is that if I say love is like a game of chess, what does it mean when you castle? What does that actually mean in terms of what we're doing? But I think that like simple, if you want to like do the most simple act of game design, probably like maybe like the trivial game design is taking a big thing and grounding it in a physical thing people are doing, and then doing that thing and thinking about what happens and talking about what happens as you do this little thing. What does that mean about what you're saying about the big thing? Where does it fall short? Where does it get going? And like if people are like, I want to make a game in an hour, it's like, do that. That's the most simple conceptual move you can make, and it can be incredibly fruitful, and you can learn a lot about where it goes wrong. Because what you'll do, right? You say, okay, love is like a game of chess. Castling is a way of saying that you're going, like you're not interested in going on a second date, you're stepping back, right? Okay, so maybe we need to have a rule for when I send you a drunk text, right? Maybe that's represented by like a special thing the bishop does, right? You start to, you start thinking about, well, what is if we're taking this metaphor very literally, what are the things that the metaphor wants that the game can't speak to? What are the limits of the way that game applies to the metaphor? How does this all talk to each other? And that is, I think, like, yeah, that's just a really good, easy way to kind of, in simple terms, if you want to make a game that gets you really thinking about what games are doing, that's just, that's a very fruitful little move to make.